Okay, well, let's continue where we left off. In the beginning, Genesis. We got to chapter 13, I believe. And here we are. Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him into the south. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver and in gold. And he went on his journeys from the south even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai, unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Abram was very rich. He was very heavy. So the Hebrew word is, for riches are a burden, and they that will be rich, but load themselves with thick clay, says Matthew Henry. There is a burden of care in getting riches, fear in keeping them, temptation in using them, guilt in abusing them, sorrow in losing them, and a burden of account at last to be given up about them. Yet God in his providence sometimes makes good men rich men, and thus God's blessing made Abram rich without sorrow. Though it is hard for a rich man to get to heaven, yet in some cases it may be. Nay, outward prosperity, if well managed, is an ornament to piety and an opportunity for doing more good. Abram removed to Bethel. His altar was gone, so that he could not offer sacrifice, but he called on the name of the Lord. You may as soon find a living man without breath as one of God's people without prayer. This one goes with the other. If you're one of God's people, your conversations with God are everyday and frequent. Now, of course, we know, because we read up to this point, that Abram built this altar there, and it was just an altar of uncut stones, basically, on which he offered a sacrifice and prayed to God. So he comes back, and I guess the altar has fallen down or whatever, but he comes to the same place, and he calls on the name of the Lord. In other words, he prays. Moving on to verse 5. And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. They certainly didn't want to build a city, and the commandment was to fill the earth, to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, so that they should spread out and separate from one another. And there was strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land. And Abram said to Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we are brethren. So we're not going to war over the land. In other words, let's separate. And Abram does, well, what you would say is the Christian thing. We'll read on. Is not the whole land before us? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I'll go to the left. You go whatever way you want, Lot. I'll go the other way. I'm going to give you the choice. Because, Abram knows that his life and all he has is in God's hands, so he's not really worried about which way he's going to go. Probably all pretty much look the same. Yeah. So Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest into Zoar. So this was a beautiful place. just gorgeous. It didn't matter which way you went. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. See, riches not only afford a matter for strife, and are the things most commonly striven about, but they also stir up a spirit of contention by making people proud and covetous. Mine and thine are the great make-baits of the war. Poverty and labor, wants and wanderings could not separate Abram and Lot, but riches did so. Bad servants often make a great deal of mischief in families and among neighbors by their pride and passion, lying, slandering, and tale-bearing. What made the quarrel worse was that the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelt then in the land. The quarrels of professors are the reproach of religion, and give occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme. It is best to keep the peace, that it be not broken. But the next best is, if differences do happen, with all speed to quench the fire that is broken out. The attempt to stay this strife was made by Abram, although he was the elder and the greater man. Abram shows himself to be a man of cool spirit, that had the command of his passion, and knew how to turn away wrath by a soft answer. Those that would keep the peace must never render railing for railing. And of a condescending spirit, he was willing to beseech even his inferior to be at peace. Whatever others are for, the people of God must be for peace. Abram's plea for peace was very powerful. Let the people of the land contend about trifles, but let not us fall out, who know better things and look for a better country. Professors of religion should be the most careful to avoid contention. Many profess to be for peace, who will do nothing towards it. Not so Abram. When God condescends to beseech us to be reconciled, we may well beseech one another. Though God had promised Abram to give this land to his seed, yet he offered an equal or better share to Lot, who had not an equal right. And he will not, under the protection of God's promise, act hardly to his kinsmen. It is noble to be willing to yield for peace' sake. So Lot lifted up his eyes, beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. Well watered, yes. If you live in a desert space like I do, it's not well watered unless you go through a lot of labor to water it. Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. Yes, all that glitters is not gold. Sodom, I'm sure, glittered, but there was trouble there, wasn't there? But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly, not just normal sinners, but exceedingly wicked, exceedingly sinners and wicked before the Lord. And the Lord said to Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, Lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. In other words, Abram, stand up and look at every direction. For all the land which thou seest, to thee I will give it, and to thy seed forever. Now, we know we have people that talk about land promises for Israel. And of course, they always come back here to the father of Israel. Grandfather. Anyway, and they point to this. But who's making the covenant here? the covenant maker. God is making the covenant. God gets to define what the terms of the covenant are. And when he says seed, he uses the singular. He doesn't say, I'm going to give it to you and all of your children forever. Or seeds would be the word for all of your children forever. I'm going to give it to you, to thee, I will give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. That's quite a promise, is it not? But God, like I said, he, the one that makes the covenant, gets to define the terms of the covenant. And we know now by progressive revelation that this term seed is very specific. And just what is that progressive revelation? Well, the Jews never really received the progressive revelation. In a way they did, but it was still hidden from their sight, because he also said to the Messiah, which was that he would give the heathen to him for his inheritance. And the Messiah, they did not connect the Messiah as the seed, but they knew that the Messiah would be of the seed, of that seed line of faith that reaches from Adam through, of course, Noah, through, of course, Abraham, then through, of course, Jacob, and then through the 12 tribes of Jacob, or specifically the tribe of Judah, which brought forth the seed, the Messiah, the one seed. So let's look at some of that progressive revelation. We have Romans 4:13. For the promise that he should be heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. See, so we get further progressive revelation. We understand further what was actually being said there, because, as I said, the one who makes the covenant determines what the terms of the covenant are. And so here we have from the same source what the terms of the covenant were that God had made. The father of the circumcision to them who are not of circumcision only, but also walk in the steps of that faith by our father Abraham, which he had being yet uncircumcised. For the promise that he should be heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if they which are of the law be heirs, faith is made void. So it's not those that are, the seed is not of the law or by the flesh. Faith is made void, and the promise made of none effect. Because the law worketh wrath, for where there is no law, there is no transgression. Therefore it is of faith that it might be by grace, to the end the promise might be sure to all the seed. Not to that only which is of the law, but to that also which is of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. As it is written, I made thee a father of many nations. Before him who he had believed, even God, who quickened the dead, and calleth on those things which be not as though they were. Galatians 3:16. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He saith not, and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ, even clarifying the promise more as to what it really means. And this I say, that the covenant that was confirmed before of God in Christ, the law which was 430 years after, cannot disannul, that it should make the promise of none effect. For all the land which thou seest, to thee I will give it, and to thy seed forever. So we are the seed of Abraham by faith, and only those of the of the Jewish nation, the Hebrews, the Israelites, who are of that same seed of faith, are the promises made. It's the promises are not made to a seed of flesh, or of flesh merely. The flesh must be joined in with the seed of faith, with it, which is Christ. So God's chosen people, all of those whose sins are covered by the blood of Christ, are the seed of Abraham by faith spoken of here, whether they are Jew or Gentile. It matters not. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. The number of the seed of faith, beginning with Adam and Eve until Christ comes, is a very great number. So much so that it's like the sand of the sea. And still more to be added to it throughout the final era, the final age of this creation, before the new heaven and the new earth. That's when the door will be closed and no more will be added to it. Verse 17. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. And Abram removed his tent, and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. So he's in the land of Hebron, from which I'm sure we get the name Hebrew. Matthew Henry says, those are best prepared for the visits of divine grace, whose spirits are calm and not ruffled with passion. God will abundantly make up in spiritual peace what we lose for preserving neighborly peace when our relations are separated from us, yet God is not. Observe also the promises with which God now comforted and enriched Abram. Of two things he assures him, a good land and a numerous issue to enjoy it. The prospects seen by faith are more rich and beautiful than those we see around us. God bade him walk through the land, not to think of fixing in it, but expect to be always unsettled, and walking through it to a better Canaan. He built an altar in token of his thankfulness to God. When God meets us with gracious promises, he expects that we should attend him with humble praises. In outward difficulties, it is very profitable for the true believer to meditate on the glorious inheritance which the Lord has for him at the last. And I say amen, and that is for all of us to understand and be instructed by. Chapter 14. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom. This is a very interesting thing here. Suddenly, we have all of these kings and kingdoms. And, these kingdoms were probably more akin to cities or towns that were springing up around one notable person, one notable leader. Because as they're being described here, we look at them now, today, at these what we have and what we have in history of these, and we know that these are not kings like of cities of millions like we have today, when the earth is much more populated, as man has continued to inhabit and populate the earth under God's command, like it or not. It's been happening. But anyway, so these were men who were leaders in their families. Many of them the great-grandfathers of the communities that grew up around them. And of course, there would be, as the communities grow larger, they would take wives of other communities and so forth. And so here we're calling them all kings or which are leaders or the fathers of these communities that grew up around certain people. So these kings, the king of Shinar, king of Elasar, Chetar Laomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, perhaps he conquered many other smaller kingdoms around him. So we get the example of how that when there was strife between Abram and Lot, how Abram talked to him, and they didn't have a falling out. They didn't go to war. One didn't conquer the other, but in love they separated and went their ways. Okay, but not always. So that's what we have going on here. And so it begins in verse 2 that these made war. All of those kingdoms or kings or small tribes made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah. So we know that Sodom was wicked and sinful before God exceedingly. And what does that bring? Well, we know that it is sin that wars in our flesh, that spills out over into our neighbors and becomes war on the earth. So that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah. Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. All these were joined together in the vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. So they fall into this plain, a desert. A salt sea is like a desert. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer. In the 13th year they rebelled. Okay, so they got along for 12 years. But in the 13th year they rebelled. A common theme. Because when you have evil men, of course, they like to rule over and rob their neighbors and take from them and accumulate wealth to themselves at the expense of their neighbors. And of course, their neighbors, or those they rule over, are going to eventually rebel. They can take so much tyranny. And in the 14th year came Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims in Ashtaroth, Karnaim, and the Zuzims in Ham, and in Ham, and the Emims in Sheva Kiriathaim, and the Horites in their Mount Seir, unto El-Paran, which is by the wilderness. And they returned and came to En-Misfat, which is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites. So you can see, like, he's throwing in Kadesh here, a landmark that the Hebrews knew when they were getting this record from God through Moses. But it was, so he's telling them where these places were in the land where they dwell now, by the name that they know them at the time. So Es-Misfat is where Kadesh is now, he's telling them, and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites, and dwell in Hazaz on Tamar. And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same as Zoar, and they joined battle with them in the vale of Siddim, with Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and with Tidal, king of nations, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings with 5. And the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their victuals, and went their way. So Sodom and Gomorrah, they fled. They left their city, and then so they came in, they conquered, they took everything, all their goods, and they left. And they took Lot, and Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. And there came out one that had escaped, and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and the brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. So they had confederations, the confederations for defense. Okay? So you see, there was a lot of threat of war because of sinful man and the heart of man continually devising evil. Who could be safe under these conditions? It was like the Wild West, if you want to bring it up to date. The wild, wild West, where there was no lawman. And there were a few vigilantes running around trying their best to keep the peace. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants. Notice that his servants were trained, but it's time for them to be armed so that they can use that training. Those born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. So they were like, Abram's had his militia. They were trained, they were ready. When the time came, they knew what to do because they were trained. They grabbed their arms and they went on their mission. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them and pursued them into Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and of the kings that were with him, at the valley of Shaveh, at the valley of Shaveh, which is the king's dale. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. Now, whether Melchizedek, king of Salem, was part in this battle, it seems that he might have had a part, or some part in support for the side that was right, because here he is. But he is the priest of the Most High God. How curious. There's a lot of mystery surrounding Melchizedek, because Jesus was called the priest after the order of Melchizedek. So what is this order after the order of Melchizedek? So Melchizedek is named as after an order that existed before the Levitical priesthood, the order of the Levitical priesthood. So Melchizedek, was he the only one that the order was named after him, or the orders being referred to by him having had belonged to it and being notable? Okay. Did God have other high priests or priests of the Most High God in the land? Well, we have one other notable priest, the priest of Midian. His name was Jethro, where Moses went when he left Egypt. So that would be the same order that preceded the Levitical order of the priesthood of the Hebrews that they received in the law when they left Egypt. So God did have priests who were heads of their households, and they were leaders of men who communities built up and gathered around them as leaders. And so Melchizedek was one of these priests, and his community was like a congregation or a church or a small city or town. So this was the order of which Melchizedek was one, because it was after the order of Melchizedek that Christ was a priest. So Christ was not a priest after the order of the Levites, obviously not even of the family of the Levites. but after the order of Melchizedek, a priest that was called and raised up by God himself directly. So, and if there was an order of these priests, then Melchizedek was one, and we said the priest of Midian, Jethro was another one. And those are the only two that come to mind. There may be others that are mentioned in the scripture, but I don't remember them. And perhaps going forward, we'll take notice from now on how many priests we can find after this order, but only three come to mind now. The first, Melchizedek, then Jethro, and of course Christ being the last of that order, the final one of that order. So we have, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, king of peace. You know, I have a ranch here, and I entertain the idea, I like to call it Hallelujah Ranch. So Melchizedek, building up a community, a city of God around him, a civitas of God around him, he wants to call it the city of peace. And I kind of have this little sneaking suspicion that Melchizedek may have occupied the place where Jerusalem, the Jerusalem of David, was built. And perhaps that is even the reason that David chose that spot for his city, because it was the city of the great king of peace, Melchizedek, and would become the great city of the great king, our Messiah, Jesus. Let's see what Melchizedek is spoken of as the king of Salem, supposed to be the place afterwards called Jerusalem, and it is generally thought that he was only a man. And I think he was only a man, like Jethro was only a man, like we are all the priests of our own household in the priesthood of Christ. So in a way, we are after the same order of Melchizedek, but we have a high priest. So Melchizedek perhaps was a high priest, but God has made us all kings and priests. So it's very fitting that we get a better understanding from this chapter, because we're dealing with kings and priests. So he's making us all kings and priests to rule and reign with him for 1,000 years upon the earth. So we get a better idea of what the millennial kingdom may look like. We may have our own areas on the earth, and that's what I feel like the Spirit has been telling me, that I may come back where I am, where I've begun a work in the earth right here, because God gave me a dream that pretty much has told me that I'm going to stay here until he comes, and that I may return here to carry on the work of the ministry that I have begun here in the earth during the millennial reign of Christ. So if we will be kings and priests in the earth, I think we have to look back to someone like Melchizedek or someone like Jethro, who were kings and priests who built up communities around them in the earth. So I'm getting a little better idea of how the prophecy of the millennial reign of Christ is going to be fulfilled. Certainly our true home will be in Jerusalem, but where we work, where we minister and rule and reign for Christ, will be in the whole earth, and many of us will return to the places that we know, where perhaps even we have established ministries, where we have perhaps even left family behind who had not accepted Christ, and we will minister to them during the millennial reign of Christ, and to their offspring throughout the millennium. Verse 19. Well, Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And you notice what he brings forth. What does he bring forth? Bread and wine. What are we to bring forth? The bread and the wine, the body of Christ. Do this in remembrance of me. Oh, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. Thank you, Father. And he blessed him, he says to Abraham, and said, Blessed be Abraham of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. So God is not just speaking to Abram. He obviously is speaking to this high priest, Melchizedek. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand. And he gave him tithes of all. So Abraham gives a tithe, a tenth of everything. He gave him tithes of all. And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, Give me the persons, and take the goods to thyself. The king of Sodom, just saved by Abram. Does he thank the God of Abraham? Does he inquire into the God of Abraham? What about this man? The king of Sodom said unto Abram, Give me the persons, and take the goods to thyself. In other words, I want my people. Because Abram conquered them. Everything that belonged to those he conquered, Abram and his confederates, everything that they took belongs to them, including the people. So Sodom begs him. He goes to him and he says to Abram, Give me the persons. It doesn't seem like the way he's expressing himself. Give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. Meaning you don't want these people. Give me the persons, you keep the goods. We'll go back to Sodom, we can rebuild. Pretty much is what he's saying. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hand unto the Lord, to the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, that I will not take anything that is thine. So anything that belonged to the king of Sodom, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich. He says, save only that which the young men have eaten, what they've already eaten, and the portion of the men which with me, the Confederates, they can take whatever portion they want, okay? But I will not take a portion for me. So his Confederates could take a portion. That's what Abram is saying. So you see, Abram is a leader of leaders in this confederacy. They all look up to him, and whatever he says is the law. He is the strongest of all of them. He says, save only which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me. Aner, Eshcol, Mamre, let them take their portion. So my Confederates can take whatever they want, but whatever portion is mine, you can keep that and take that back to your town with you. That way you can never say that I have enriched Abram, because he wants them to know that his riches only come from one source. He has no other source than God Almighty himself. Observe the king of Sodom's grateful offer to Abram. Give me the souls, and take thou the substance. Gratitude teaches us to recompense to the utmost of our power those that have undergone fatigues, run hazards, and been at expense for our service and benefit. Abram generously refused this offer. He accompanies his refusal with a good reason, lest thou shouldst say, I have made Abram rich, which would reflect upon the promise and covenant of God, as if he would not have enriched Abram without the spoils of Sodom. The people of God must, for their credit's sake, take heed of doing anything that looks mean or mercenary, or that savors of covetousness and self-seeking. Abraham can trust the possessor of heaven and earth to provide for him. And I believe that's the end of chapter 14. So we've gone 13 and 14. We still have some few minutes left, so let's see where we're going here. Let's see. Wendy Fawn and Gio Veldon in the chat room. Good to see you there. Thank you for at least popping in. I'm only looking at the Rumble chat room, so, that's the only chat room. That's the only place I'm live is on Rumble, because I edit these when I get done with them. I try to do a rough edit before I upload them. That way when I sneeze or cough or something, I can get that out, or any long pauses or whatever other problems may arise during a broadcast, I tend to edit out, just to make the video more concise for those that consume it later. But then later on, it's like in the hour that's coming up, when we will be jumping into the history of Protestantism. So if you want to continue that, you'll have your book open if you have a book, or if you want to get a copy of this, if you would like to buy this you can buy one volume at a time. I don't know, they're like $22 or something. They're fairly inexpensive for what you get, 500 to 600 pages per volume. Anyway, if you go to my website, nicholasarthur.wordpress.com, click on the free bookstore tab there, or you can just go to crosstheborder.org, because I have my publishing company, Cross the Border Publishing. So go to crosstheborder.org. It'll take you straight to that free bookstore tab there. And you can avail yourself of any free versions there. I try to get free versions published, which this one will be after the Audible is done, or I'm publishing it as I go in the second hour there, on the history of Protestantism. And so many of the books there you'll find free versions of in PDF or in Audible playlists on Rumble or wherever but also if you're listening to those series as I go live on the air and do them live, you can still go and you can still follow the link to Amazon and leave a review there, because I'm giving you the Audible. So, and tell them I'm listening to the Audible, I'm listening to Nicholas as he records it or whatever, then say all the great things about the book, and James A. Wiley that you can, and about the publication that you can. So it really helps us to get more reviews on these products, and we need them, because I would like to be able to support First Amendment Radio and the work I'm doing here through my own labors. And this is one way that I can provide a way for God to bless this ministry. So if you have no money, you can't afford to buy them, please avail yourself of the free versions of all the books there. But please do go and leave at least a 5-star. And if you're really want to be generous in sacrificing, you could actually write a good and well thought out review for the books that you're reviewing. I would really love that if people would do that, but apparently most people don't want to sacrifice too much or take too much time. So I hope that you're one of those that go against the rule. And the rule is most people, don't support anything at all these days, unfortunately. But God's people should have enough compunction to be supporting God's servants somewhere. Even Abram tithed 10% for the work that Melchizedek, king of Salem, was doing in the earth in building a congregation, a city around him. Okay, let's move on to, make sure you like and share the videos and the playlists once they're uploaded, because right now this is, you can like the live stream, and you should do that, and share it if you've already liked it. But later on when I post it, if you go there, just look for it and like them, even though you already heard them live, and share them again. That would be appreciated. I need all the help I can get, people. I'm just one man here, and if I have to depend on the people, the listeners, to be my promotions team, I have to say that, except for maybe one or two of you, you guys aren't doing a very good job for me, or for the Lord, that is, or for the work that I'm doing here. So, yeah, I guess that's about as bad as it gets. All right, let's go to, we got a few minutes left here. So let's look at chapter 16 anyway. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. Boy, this is a hard discussion to have and be frank about. That this was a different economy. The law was not given yet. And many of the details of the law were not drawn out. Many will say that Abram was committing adultery. But was he? Yeah. It was a different economy. We see that some men had more than one wife. And God even encoded that in his law to regulate it. Okay? So I have to look at God's law and say, who am I to condemn posthumously what God himself did not condemn at that time? Now, we live in a different economy. We used to have slaves. And it was lawful, I guess, for a woman who had a slave. She owned this slave, okay? And it was her servant or her maid. And she tells Abram to go lay with her maid that he might have children from her. Because is Sarai thinking, is she thinking that I want children? No, she's thinking about her husband. You know, she's thinking about her man. He's going to have no seed in the earth. And of course, there is a lack of faith also being exhibited here too. That she's not willing to wait on the Lord. And perhaps her faith was not that great as Abram's, but he gives in to his wife and he goes into her. So did Abram sin? I'm not going to say that he sinned. Many people will say that he sinned, but I'm not going to say that he sinned because there was no law that he was breaking at this time. There was nothing codified, and there was no written law detailing, and there was no, there just was no law in existence against what he was doing. So he said, and Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. So Abram now has 2 wives. So one wife doesn't annul the marriage with the other wife, apparently. Each marriage is a separate marriage. But men and women being born with the sin nature of Adam, this is not going to fall out well. And he went unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Now she's going, I'm better than Sarai, because God has given me a child by our master, by our husband, and has not given her. This is what's going on. Yeah. I think it was last week, or last time I was live, we went through we talked about the 10 virgins and then the marriage supper of the Lamb. And in a perfect world without sin, if a man had 2 wives, one would not be jealous of the other either. They would each care about each other and love each other so much that they would be more giving and forgiving than becoming jealous or despising another one and thinking higher of themselves, because none of us who are the bride of Christ are jealous or should be jealous about another man's relationship with Christ. But we should all be blessed. If we see someone has a closer relationship, that we should look and see, what can I do that they're doing that would bring me into that same type of relationship? Or we would say, it's like looking at what's going on today, and now we're all examining a certain man who was martyred here recently. And we look at his life and I think, man, this young man, when I was 31, I was still wandering in a wilderness. Even though I was a Christian, I had no mentorship. I had no discipling. I was kind of wandering in a wilderness by myself, lost. But I know that God adopted me. I know I was his, but my walk was in his hand too. And Charlie Kirk's walk was in God's hands too, and he used him mightily. But I can't be jealous, and I'm sure that Charlie Kirk never despised anyone else because God used him or gave him a higher position. That would be like being jealous of the king of Melchizedek. Anyway, we're going to pick up in this chapter next time. That will be likely tomorrow.